Hi everyone, this is Razan, and I am going to be giving you a brief overview of Chapter 19, which is Performance Instruction and Technology in Healthcare Education. So first we'll talk about healthcare and its context. Healthcare is broad, includes many different avenues, aspects, and professionals. As you can see by this very intense list, there is quite a bit involved in healthcare. However, this is still not a comprehensive list. There are still very many subspecialties and sub-subspecialties. And if you look at how wide and varied the field of healthcare can be, you can kind of understand the scope of healthcare education and the impact it can have and the necessary practices that must be done or performed in order to make sure that healthcare education is uniform. So who is exactly involved in health education? There are many different aspects to healthcare education. Obviously, the schools themselves, government regulations, companies that produce the different products that we use when delivering healthcare, the societies and associations that as healthcare providers we must belong to for many reasons, and of course the hospitals, clinics, and facilities that provide healthcare. And to some degree, all of these entities are involved in the education of professionals and providing healthcare to consumers. So, an overview of medical education itself, the trends in medical education spill into other domains such as nursing and allied health, public health schools, but the basic study of healthcare education began with medical doctors. And the process of medical education can be divided into three phases based on medical doctor studies, and that is the undergraduate or medical school phase, the graduate or residency phase, and the postgraduate or continuing education phase. Nursing, public health, allied health schools, they've all kind of adopted the same mentality. It is a little different for each specialty and subspecialty, but for the most part, they like to stick with the same kind of methods of delivery, including case studies and research-based learning. Carlisle talks about the three phases of medical education history, which is how we got to where we are now. Initially, medical education was based on the works of the likes of Da Vinci and Vesalius and their drawings of the human anatomy. That was pretty much the first indication or practice of medical education. That's considered the pre-scientific. Scientific is based in the 1900s, which is when Flexner, Abraham Flexner, created the Flexner Report for the Carnegie Foundation. And there he discussed how medical education is delivered, and it calls for affiliation of academic programs with colleges, universities, hospitals. There's a two-year didactic and a two-year clinical aspect to most healthcare education when you're talking about the baccalaureate level. Post-Flexner is the current methods of teaching, and that's really based on problem-based learning and evidence-based learning, and it's about group work for both real and simulated medical cases. And that's kind of where my scope of practice is. We do a lot of hands-on real and simulated practice. So problem-based and evidence-based learning. Problem-based is based on or is about looking at previous problems and trying to derive your solution based on how the previous problems were solved. And as your expertise grows, your problem solving becomes second nature because you become more familiar with the different problems that are presented, and you can kind of be more automatic in the way that you solve your problems that are in front of you. Evidence-based is based on research. It's an expansion of problem-based, and it's about formulating clinical questions, using medical literature to find your evidence, applying that evidence to the patients that you have. It also involves consulting information sources and kind of staying current on everything, and that goes back to being parts of medical society associations and subscribing to different types of journals or publications to stay current. There are other attributes to health science education. Risk is a big attribute. As somebody who is working with patients who are sick, you can be exposed to different disease processes. You might be working with hazardous substances. And of course, the most primary risk, which is the life versus death aspect of your career. As a healthcare provider, your decisions can affect a person's life up to including death. So it is a very high risk type of education system. Altruism and communication are a big part of it as well. You are in the healthcare field because you care about people, so you want to help people. Doctors are known to take the Hippocratic Oath before they graduate or as they graduate from medical school. It's about building trust through communication and being honest and truthful in how you conduct yourself in the field. And that's also about being able to manage different types of people on your team in a way that is conducive to helping others. Oh, and let me go back to sensory perception. This is also an attribute. If you aren't able to see or hear or feel physically, you may not be as capable of delivering healthcare as others are, especially when it comes to taking pulse or blood pressure, to looking at EKGs or to x-rays and trying to evaluate the information in front of you. Obviously, science is a major attribute to the health science education. Teaching is an extension of science, and the skills that go behind the caregiving are also all involved in the science itself. And what they found in research is that subject matter experts are usually less likely to have an egocentric attitude towards teaching in their field as opposed to those who don't teach in the health science areas. I find that kind of hard to swallow because I know a lot of people who teach gen ed or who teach K through 12 who aren't really in it for the egocentric or the personal empowerment. They're there to help other people understand their topic. So I don't really agree with that phrase itself, but I haven't done the research myself. Innovation is a big part of health science. In fact, the healthcare industry was a large contributor to some of the developments of educational technology applications, and they've always played a pretty big role in doing research and conducting research to advance healthcare education. So there are different methodologies to teaching health science. Obviously, virtual reality simulation, multimedia are pretty easy to use, and they're pretty broad scope because they're used across many fields. I am linking this website, which is for, it's called an anatomage table, and I'm going to show you the table itself and how it functions. It's actually pretty neat. It's a touch screen table, and people can, or students can use it to manipulate the human body. You can upload different cases from hospitals or doctors' offices using X-ray, MRI, interventional radiology, CT scans, and you can actually separate the different levels of the body. So you can take the skin off, and then you can take the muscles off, you can take the bones, you can pretty much work your way down to the very details of each body part. It's really actually an interesting tool. We use it at my campus with the students, and it really works well because they get a very hands-on way of looking at the body when they're not actually in clinic. So there are some issues involved in healthcare education and factors as well. Increased internet use has become a big factor because of the need to develop standards for health information. You really don't want to just rely on anything you find on the internet. It has to be something that's cited to publications or to research that is accredited or that has been peer reviewed, so that you don't have all this random information that doesn't really make a lot of sense or that isn't accurate. Cost of teaching versus providing care is another issue. When you're dealing with on-the-job training or clinical education, so students go out into the clinical sites, you have healthcare providers who are not having to split their time between giving patient care and teaching, and so that can kind of create some issues with cost-effective methods of healthcare. Regulations and standards are a big factor in education. We have the HIPAA Act, the cybersecurity issues. Those are very important when it comes to the privacy of patient information and the portability of moving patient information from one facility or entity to the next. Also, with regulations, getting certified and continuing your education in the field of healthcare is very, very prominent. Almost everybody who is in the field of healthcare must do that on a regular basis. And conversions, which is pretty much a very fancy word for saying the combination of different technologies. So you can have a web conference with 2 or 3 doctors who are all treating the same patient, and as they're doing a web conference, they're also sharing Google Docs or a Google Sheets or a Google Slides, or they may be doing some form of screencast like we're doing right now, as well as a phone call or a video conference. So there is a lot of different ways to incorporate education and technology in healthcare. So that's pretty much an overview of this chapter. There's a lot of detail in there that I didn't go into, but feel free to go back and look into it and kind of get your feel for it if you really want to. My biggest takeaway from this chapter is how much growth the field has had, and also how much technology has become a part of the field of education in healthcare. And that's not just on the side of medical doctors, but on all of the other subspecialties such as nursing, allied health, even medical assistants, any kind of healthcare provider. Their education is so centered on technology now. And so I think it's really important for us to understand how education technology can contribute to the education of people in those fields. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation and have a good day.